Take a quick sip of tea. Oh, exciting stuff. Hello and welcome back to the Sketchpad Pod. I'm Alicia and today I'm going to be going through my Art Foundation sketchbooks. I have already gone through my GCSE sketchbook and my Art A-level sketchbook, but I don't often see people posting about their Art Foundation sketchbooks. I guess less people take an Art Foundation, but I know that I would have probably found it helpful to know what to expect before choosing whether to do an Art Foundation. Hopefully this will be interesting for some of you out there who might be considering doing a foundation year. You quite often need to do a foundation year before you can go and take certain art degrees. But without too much introduction, let's dive in. I have 4 books to get through. These are my art sketchbooks. I did also have 2 contextual studies sketchbooks, which are more about research and art history. So if you would be interested in knowing more about contextual studies and the research side of the art process, let me know and I'd be happy to do a video on that. Just to briefly outline that my foundation was split into 3 stages, which I think is fairly common. Those stages were the exploration stage, the specialisation stage and the final major project. I was encouraged to use sketchbooks in a much more kind of loose way in Art Foundation, and it was less kind of seen as an artwork in itself. You didn't have to make it pretty with lots of titles and backgrounds and stuff, which I know some people are sad about. But to be honest, it worked alright for me. Let's dive into this exploration stage book. On the first page, I just have some monoprint collages that I don't think was really related to anything, but I just wanted to do it and thought it'd be nice. And then the first page is the typographic project we did. So within my foundation, you got to try out certain different kind of pathways in art which you might want to go into. So typography comes under like graphics. We were set the task of creating 3 A5 typographic images, but on this first page I'm playing around with quotes. Yeah, and so I kind of went along the lines, this was when peak Donald Trump era, but I thought it would be funny to juxtapose some of Donald Trump's most infamous quotes with some of Shakespeare's quotes and compare the two, and I made these poems, and you can see a lot of them here, and I was playing with different like colouring and lettering. And if I just skip ahead, I then used collage to develop these poems and the kind of visual layout. I made this first A5 typographic, which is a collaged poem. I think it speaks for itself, really. I've not done anything this like political since, I don't think, but I am pretty pleased with this one. So then going back, the next inspiration I had was to look at Post Secrets, which was a community art project where people mailed postcards anonymously. So I had photo examples of some of these postcards, and then I started thinking about what my own postcard secret would be and the sort of layout, this time using like found text. If I skip forward, I did a bit more experimentation with text, and you can see also like some embroidery that I tried out for the other piece, and that led to this here, which says, my brother told me if you watch too much TV your eyes turn square. I believed him and it terrified me, but I still watch too much TV. And this I made on a printing press. So I painted the background and then I laid out all of the individual letters and printed them on, which I'd never done before, and that was really cool. The final design was inspired by kind of sexist ads from like the 1950s, and I found this really interesting graphic from a Tide advert. So I took that kind of colouring and graphic design, and I wanted to change it into my own representation looking at the Me Too movement. So I then was doing like sketchups of the design, and it says Me Too, time's up, no more abuse in the office. That one was pretty simple. I just borrowed the kind of Tide logo design and I changed it. As you can see, I hopped back between pages on that project to try and explain it, but I was working simultaneously on 3 ideas at once. This is the paper project, which was meant to be kind of like a fashion project, I guess. Also looking at kind of 3D forms and how we could take paper, a 2D form, and make it 3D. So I just have some pictures and notes and then kind of different experimenting like folding and cutting techniques on these pages. I think the thing you'll see is that there's, like I said, it's not as pretty as kind of GCSE or Art A level. It is more process based and more thought based. So I have photos of like further experimentation of different folds. I created this sort of design which was inspired by Elizabethan ruffs. This page then shows me going about trying to make it, and like you can see there's a little photo of me trying it on as I went along to try and get a bigger photo. But I made this kind of massive eccentric ruff, and I do think it turned out rather successfully. This page is pretty boring, but it's all pencil drawings, and it was following on from the paper fashion project to a paper installation group project. So my group decided to create a landscape. So you can kind of see we did a little mock-up, and then we were actually given a kind of cubed exhibition space to create our paper installation, and we taped out where we wanted everything to go, and then we started just folding tons and tons of paper. All of this is just process shots really. More kind of installation shots, and like I also took like an aerial view as it was coming together. Yeah, and then more kind of process shots. We also made like a kind of hanging facade that covered the front so that you had to like walk in to look at the whole landscape. Moving on, this is the glove project, again kind of like a fashion project. My art foundation was quite a small department, so we didn't have as many different pathway options, so I think they tried to create projects that like bridged different pathways or areas of interest that people might have. Basically I was exploring kind of ideas of what gloves have meant through history. So there's photos of like old gloves and also different artists using gloves. I was thinking about the engendered notions of what a glove is and who wears a glove. Examples on this page, and then me starting to photograph myself in this latex glove which we've been given. And then for this one I basically ended up doing a performance piece, a performance art piece, where I kind of dolled up this like latex glove to make it look like some sort of fancy period glove, and then I basically wore it for a day like around London and sort of interacted with, you know, the contemporary urban landscape with my ridiculous frilly glove on. Do I think it was the most successful project? Not really. I looked quite silly doing it, but you know, always good to experiment. This was from a trip that we did to Margate, and I think we were meant to be doing a colour project, but it kind of went by the wayside and we didn't get a lot of work done that week. So mainly in here it's just photographs that I took while we were in Margate of lots of colours and textures, and little sketches that I did in reference to those photos. But that is everything from my exploration stage book. And so after that I specialised in fine art, No surprise there. The next sketchbook I have is the Specialisation sketchbook. So this was now getting into work that wasn't set projects. There were prompts, but it was more independently led projects. First, we were looking at the body as sight, and so I started thinking about internal versus external spaces. It's kind of like mood boards, but very sketchy, just like small little ideas. You'll see in this book that research does become just part of your sketchbook, whereas I think sometimes at A level and things they would want you to keep it separate. This is some work by like Sarah Lucas and Francis Bacon, and then there's Joseph Beuys and Amsel Kiefer, more research, Hans Bellmer and his sort of weird drawings. And yeah, me just making a lot of notes on it. Here you can see me sketching. This is quite kind of Hans Bellmer, this sketch here. And yeah, more experimentations on these pages, like pen drawing with kind of the organs visible of the body, surrealist, Hans Bellmer-esque collage. Then here is where I start developing kind of more conceptual ideas of what I want my work to be about. I was reading Gaston Bachelard's The Poetics of Space and thinking about a sense of belonging and home and how we can kind of belong within our own skin or within our body. So I've got a drawing of a womb, but it has a home, like a lived space inside it. And then this is looking at more of like a spiritualistic idea of like the internal body spreading outwards. I really like these. These are watercolour and ink. This is a big drawing of lungs. So I was looking at Louise Bourgeois' work, and I did this little like cutout figure. These abstracted figures were coming from a lot of like the art I was looking at previously in the book. So I then took it and I scanned it and I made this kind of scanned collage. And again, here is me kind of abstracting different body shapes and doing more life drawing. Here I went to see a Gustav Klimt exhibition, so this is like drawings from the exhibition. Also I saw Egon Schiele's work as well. I wanted to move into something more sculptural, so this is me planning out designs and looking at kind of using negative space to suggest the like interior self that we can't see. Definitely inspired by the sort of like sculptural artists that I've been looking at, like Sarah Lucas and Louise Bourgeois. You can see here Louise Bourgeois, some of her sculptures, and then also process pictures of me making this body shape. It's important for the examiner to see like all of the process steps that I did, but you can see I made a torso, a leg and a head, and then I sort of strung them together. It looked more creepy than perhaps I had first imagined, but I do still quite like it. So then I think I still had a fair amount of time on this project. I re-evaluated everything I'd done so far, and I wrote this. What if you could sit inside yourself, sit inside your skin? What would the air feel like? What would the space feel like? What would the texture be? How would it feel? How would it move? Would you breathe around yourself? Could you see outside of your body or be enclosed in darkness? The external becomes internal and your internal becomes external. You are inside the inside of you. Your body is as though peeled back and rearranged. That's like quite a mouthful, and obviously to try and translate that into something visual is an interesting challenge that I set myself. So I basically started sketching this idea of creating a body tent, which was me playing on the kind of ideas of domestic spaces, childhood spaces, where you would make your own kind of blanket tents or forts, and then thinking about reflecting that as the body, as our kind of internal space of comfort and being. And then I moved on to kind of fabric experimentations. There's more experimentations. I ended up using this kind of grey fabric and then putting like emulsion paint on it so that I could have this like colour come through. And there's some process steps and me setting up this like big tent in the corner of my studio. And to be honest, this was a really fun project to do, painting these like abstract pink fleshy like forms and sewing these like big mounds of like fabric onto it. I also did a bit of embroidery onto it, and then these, which you might have seen in my last video, this is called a contact sheet, and it's just all of the photos that I took from that project. The work was actually in the inside, so you had to sit in the tent to see the work, so it was kind of hard to document. I also borrowed like a red light, like a stage lamp, and I put that in so that everything was kind of red and bodily. But yeah, I was really happy with how that turned out, and actually that project, we ended up reusing it and wrapping it around a pillar for my final major projects exhibition. So it was not my final major project, but we ended up exhibiting it anyway because it had kind of become part of our studio culture. Like whenever people were tired or needed a break, they would just go and sit in my tent. Okay, and then this was called the Encounters project, where we were basically sent on a coach off to the Pitt Rivers and Ashmolean Museum, which I really loved. It was a great trip, and I particularly enjoyed visiting the Pitt Rivers Museum. So these are traditional textiles and patterns, but also there's like some drawings of what I was thinking about prior to the trip. I was thinking about these old kind of ritualistic fabrics and patterns. This is an artist, Yoshiaki Kusama, who works a lot with pattern, and Miro works a lot with pattern and kind of childhood or spiritualistic imagery. And then this page is actually ripped out of a different sketchbook, came from my trip to the Ashmolean and the Pitt Rivers Museum. The amazing thing about these museums are that they have loads of old artefacts and kind of objects from loads of different cultures. That's something that still really interests me today, so I feel very lucky to have been able to visit it. I started becoming interested in the power that objects can have and the importance that we can place upon objects. Mood board, mind map, like figuring out ideas, and more photos, lots of notes. This little sketch of a teddy bear. It says, "Reminds me of her and of my childhood," which was a quote from my dad. And you can also see still reference images. This is like an Annette Messenger sculpture here with like soft toys and photography. I kind of became obsessed with the image of the bear. This is a collage, so again kind of like referencing back to other stuff I'd done earlier. This was of old photographs of like me and my mum. It's interesting because I guess the collage kind of breaks up the photos and it's almost as if they're like distorted or degrading. More bears, bears and collages. So these two bears were like found objects that I painted, and then I gave them two little signs. One was a photo of me as a kid, and the other was a stitched message that says, "Even if the gift is small, the pleasure will be great," and that quote came from an object in the Pitt Rivers Museum. And I painted them gold because it was meant to reflect their kind of sentimental worth externally. So again, looking at like internal, external. This is a monoprint collage. This is a bit of a collage, not gonna lie. I think I was running low on ideas at this point. Oh yeah, this here was one of my most controversial ideas. Not everyone liked it, but basically I wanted to make my own bear and then destroy it somehow, and then contain it in resin, like it was being, or putting it in a container like it was being preserved, like the objects are being preserved at the museum. And this is me making my bear, which my parents and my friends became quite fond of, and then I burnt it, and I will never live down being the person that burnt a bear in Art Foundation. I guess it was meant to be that, like, even though the object had physically been tarnished, the sentimental value of it was still the same. This is me just doing a bit of research about the origin of the name teddy bear and a little sculpture of a teddy bear. Oh my gosh, this is gonna be a long edit. This is the final project of this book, I think, and this was called the Dungeness Project, again inspired by a trip that my whole Art Foundation group took to Dungeness. And so we had to respond to that, and it's a coastal town, which is, you have to have special permission to go there. It's very weird. It's a really like rundown but quite beautiful coastal landscape, and I just took lots of photos, and so I started making more collages initially. That's kind of one of my go-tos at Art Foundation, was collages using monoprint textures, and yeah, these are more kind of quick sketches of different shapes that I found within my photos. More photos, so many photos. I don't think this was the most like inspiring project for me, but the way that I then kind of turned it back into something that interested me was I started looking at the shells and driftwood that people had collected while we were there, and my friends actually gave me some of their rocks and shells and stuff that they'd collected. And I started thinking again about this thing of collecting objects, collecting shells, and why we're so like fascinated with these small miniature capsules of a moment or a memory. And so I looked at Barbara Hepworth, a great example of kind of coastal sculptures and things that were inspired by the coastal landscape in a much more abstract way. So then I basically started making shell sculptures. It's also interesting because I think you see a lot of those like knick-knack shell sculptures in tourist shops. They can be kind of tacky, but also, you know, charming in their own way. In the end, these sculptures are something that I still revisit today, and I've still made more of them since then. Right, okay, specialisation book done. Then the final stage is my final major project, and this is split into two books, two square books. I realise I love squares, and I think my love for squares started with these two sketchbooks. We were allowed within our final major project to spend a massive amount of time researching, and we were encouraged to go to museums or galleries or exhibitions that were on that we thought would be of interest to help us develop our ideas before we actually had to make our final outcome or the piece that would be exhibited at the end of the year. So I started looking at kind of vulnerability, kind of human emotion and the human condition. So quite similar to some of the stuff that I'd been doing in my specialisation stage. And so this just started with, again, sketches, a lot of kind of bodily sketches, abstract sketches. There's a drawing of the peaks. I went to Sheffield, so just some sketches of that. At the time I was Christian, so I was looking at ideas of grace and grace as a gift. So really there can be so many different avenues of inspiration. One of the places I decided to go for my research was the V&A Museum of Childhood. You know, in the days where you could just travel anywhere that you wanted. Did some drawings of like old dolls and marionette puppet. Again, there's this like weird clown drawing and dolls' houses. I saw Rachel Whiteread's Place, which is a artwork that's actually exhibited within the Museum of Childhood. More drawings, more images, more notes, lots of photographs. I also went to Pollock's Toy Museum, which is also in London, and they have some of the oldest toys and dolls in the world. Yeah, and so here is like some postcards and stuff that I also got. Yeah, I really enjoyed collecting postcards. I think they can be quite good visual inspiration, but also, again, the idea of a postcard as a memento of something. So it's just developing ideas. And then, oh my gosh, yeah, more notes, more photos, but you get the idea. This led me into further artist research. Identity, I think, is the overarching term I could describe for this project. So there's Gerard Richter, there's Christian Bertolansky, his work's really interesting. I looked more into Rachel Whiteread, some Sarah Lucas and Anthony Gormley, like textile, soft sculpture, and like domestic spaces. Kiki Smith, Joseph Boys. Mainly this sketchbook is research. And some of the research that I was looking into was childhood psychology, ideas of how memories or experiences form our identity. So that was kind of where all this research ended up leading me to, and so I had to come up with a title of a question that I was going to be exploring for the rest of this project. So I decided to come up with the wordiest title I could think of, which is The Formation of a Conscious Identity Through Memory and the Body's Experiences. That was the title we were running with. And so from there I started looking at some poetry. So because I was starting to look at psychology and the development of memory and childhood experiences, I went to the Freud Museum. Again, I was really fascinated by all of these like objects that Freud kept and his kind of domestic space. So these are just sketches and notes and photographs from that trip. I also went to the Wellcome collection, which is more of a kind of scientific look at the body and the body's experiences. Got a little postcard from one of the artworks there. Some more research here. Meanwhile, I think these are some sketches just of places that I was travelling to. You never really know like how these things will feed back in, but this was a sketch from St Mark's Square in Venice. I looked at the 8 cycle theory of human development. More artist research, looking at like, God, I'm gonna butcher this, Magdalena Abrakanowicz? Yeah, let's just not. But I've seen her work in person since, and it's really, really beautiful, really haunting. We actually get onto some artwork in this section. So this is an old photo of me and a friend that I just did a little sketch of. And I started thinking about my own childhood and my own childhood memories. I did this quick little drawing of words which are called the virtues of development. On this page there's a little quote from a prayer that we used to say when I was young, and then if I take this off you can see there is a collage of little baby me and some old photos, but also the like textile element of it I was still really interested in. More monoprinting over old photographs. It's just a lot of experimentation. It's not that much different to what you would be asked to do at our A level, but it's just becoming more and more extended and more developed into your own personal interest. And then this is like another text of me and my brother. These are some kind of further ideas with old photographs. So at this point I was thinking of making a doll, partly inspired like Pippi Longstocking-esque type doll. Yeah, so this was then me looking at the actual structure of making a doll and how I would be able to do that, and it did seem more complex than I thought it was going to be, because I wanted to make like a big doll, like a life-size doll. And so I started thinking of other ideas as well. This is me drawing a little sketch of maybe doing a quilt. So this was me doing some experiments. I cut up a bear and I turned it into a heart. I don't know, not my best. And then this was me practicing possibly making like a doll's head. And by this point I just decided it was a no-go. It was not a great idea. But yeah, so I was a little bit stuck at this point. And I went to a Dorothea Tanning exhibition, and so this is lots of sketches from this Dorothea Tanning exhibition. Her work included soft sculpture, which is what I went for. Coming away from the exhibition, the thing that struck me most about her work was her paintings, especially her later paintings. On this page you can see the painting that inspired me the most, and it was very abstract and it was quite heavenly in a way. I was really inspired by that image, and that definitely like led me in a completely different path. So this was me trying out that making of the memory quilt, and I think it was a good like starting point. And there's a few more notes here, but really that is the end of that sketchbook, because then I decided to move across into Final Major Project 2, and this is where more artwork should be. This is not full, so this shouldn't take us too long. But yeah, so this was then where I started working outside my sketchbook a lot more. So really it's, again, like documenting the process of what I'm making. So a lot of photos and notes. But I started making this kind of fabric piece which used old shirt cuffs and bare pieces, photographs and like monoprint text. So a lot of the things I've been looking at in the previous sketchbook, but just putting them all onto one piece. And then there's a bit more research here because I was looking back through my other sketchbook, and you might have seen, but there was a image of Robert Rauschenberg's bed, and I was really drawn to that image since I was looking back at this painterly aspect of my work, and the way that he created these assemblages of found objects. I was really inspired by this kind of like reclamation of these objects, but also how kind of dark and visceral his painting was. So this is where my actual final major project piece starts. And this is not the way that everyone's going to do it. Some people will have kept making lots of little pieces of work and then would only start their final piece of work in the week or few weeks running up to the exhibition. But what happened was each work that I made ended up coming together to create one singular work at the end. So here was the first one I made, which is a quilt fabric again. So I sewed lots of found materials, bears together, and then I painted over it in a quite Rauschenberg inspired way. But the painting and the shapes and symbols behind it were references to my own childhood experiences, and it was quite a personal project. This was looking at my like family home and the elements of like disruption and divorce that happened in my early childhood. That was about the blue door of my old childhood home, and that being kind of a boundary between my two parents. And so here I was then starting to think about presentation and how these kind of soft fabric pieces could be hung. And so Ella Natsui does some really lovely draping work. There's some more kind of textile elements that I've added. Some really rubbish painting going on here, let's just ignore that. And then this is the second piece I did. I added some ruching into the work, probably inspired by Ella Natsui. I did a exact homage to Rauschenberg's bed in this piece, where I put a bed to one side, and so this was me thinking again about my childhood bed and the kind of lullabies that would be sung to me. So embroidered onto it, it has the lullaby "You Are My Sunshine." I was playing into that lullaby with the window and the rain and this kind of sunshine here. This is a sketch of how I thought I might hang these paintings or present them. This is the next piece I did, and this is huge. So I did actually do a kind of little sketch of what I was thinking of doing on it, and again it was kind of like a nighttime scene was the plan. Here this bear kind of gets literally cut and tucked into the fabric. The fabric I used is really tough, it was like an old carpet. Then I embroidered Forget Me Not, which is the name of a flower, one of my favourite flowers growing up, but also this kind of cry to like not forget my younger self. And also I painted on the phrase "I have four angels around me spread," which again comes from a prayer that was said to me as a child. Okay, and then we're moving on now to the final work in this series. Again, still quilting, still using like bare fabrics. In this piece, there's not as many photos to show you, but the kind of door imagery comes back in here. But rather this time, this was looking at a memory I had of my father's studio where he worked, and there was a play park, and there was a hole in this green hedge, and basically it was kind of like a doorway between the play park and his studio, but also it's like, again, that door of the boundary line between certain areas of my childhood. What happened was I decided I wanted all of the works in the final show, and I was really lucky that my tutor gave me like a massive wall to just hang it all on. And so I basically was playing around here with how things would be set up and really being particular about where I pinned stuff, how I hung things. I will put a photo of my final work. It's annoyingly going to have me in it because I don't really have any photos of the work without me in it. In this photo you can see me wearing a shirt which says Forget Me Not on it, and it has some Forget Me Not flowers which I made. So in some ways I became part of the work on exhibition night. And that is the end of my sketchbook tour. I hope that has been interesting and useful for you. Yeah, my main takeaway would be that the sketchbook at Art Foundation is not something that you have to do, and it's not going to look the same for each person. Unfortunately, it's more just about showing your work to an examiner. So whatever way you can document your work and show your thought process, your research and your actual artwork, that's the way to do it. For me, my sketchbooks ended up being a lot of photos and writing, and to be fair, my sketchbooks have become even less aesthetically pleasing as I've gone on to degree level. But that's not to say that if you love your sketchbooks and you love making aesthetically pleasing sketchbooks, then go ahead and do it, because no one should tell you how to do your sketchbooks, because they are a very personal thing for an artist, I feel. Stay safe, stay well, wishing you all the best through lockdown round 3 if you're in the UK like me, and